Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Authors Vox. Today, I'm joined by J.A.L.S, the author of the Stone and Soul series. Book one, Etch, is currently out, and I believe book two is coming out soon. But J.A.L.S, would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers slash listeners?
Yeah, so I'm J.A.L.S, also known as J.A.L. I have my two books. They released at different times. So, book one released in 2022 originally, book two originally released in 2023. And these are the reprint editions of them that just came out this June. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought I was still waiting on book two. Perfect. So I ask everybody the same question who comes on, and you're obviously a fantasy author, so you'll know what I mean when I say this. But what is your favorite magic system? Now this can come from TVs, movies, games, etc.
I really like nature magic systems, so anything that uses natural elements, specifically geology. But I also really enjoyed like
Ooh.
the magic system that was used in Inkheart. Like that was really cool using like the silver tongue power.
Oh my god. You you have reminded me of a series. I think I have that somewhere in my house, but the hold those books and that movie had over me when I was like 12 years old was insane. What a
I actually know
pull.
a fun fact about that movie. So the author chose Brendan Fraser as Mo because that's who she was thinking of when she wrote Mo.
Oh, perfect. I
Makes
love a
you better.
casting like that. Yeah. Oh man, the pull you have just pulled is insane. I love that answer. Um So we're here to talk about you, so let's talk about you. How long have you been writing? You said you've released two books, you've reprinted them. How long have you been writing as a whole,
So
not even just professionally?
I've been writing since around 2002. I have had several novels finished, but I did lose them to data wipes or drive wipes. I lost a
Mm,
laptop, and that lost like three of my novels. So it took a little while to get back into it. So I started writing Stone Souls when I was around 27.
that is unfortunate. It's always hard losing something and then having to come back to it is always such a what's the word I'm looking for? Such a roadblock that's so hard to overcome. Um,
Definitely.
since writing, let's say instead of going all the way back to 2002, let's when you're talking about Stone Souls, was there a specific inspiration that pushed you back into writing, specifically into writing Stone Souls?
Yeah, actually, when I took a break from writing, I really got into video games, World of Warcraft and EverQuest specifically. So that kind of
Nice.
drew on that like imagination of elves and powers and open world concepts. Yeah.
Amazing. I World of Warcraft is so
Mhm.
solid. So I read Etch and
Yeah.
I as I said, I really enjoyed it. I'm a huge fan of elves personally. They're my favorite race to play in as D&D for D&D. Um, and the narrative has really grabbed me quite a bit. So when you talk about how, EverQuest and World of Warcraft kind of fueled that world of elves, um, was it something you had to work with before you found the narrative, or did you, while playing, kind of come up with this narrative in your head that then became book one?
So it all was kind of cinematic in my head when I was writing. It all just kind of poured out of me in one stream. I did get some feedback originally on the first draft, so to speak, from some people that I worked with at the bookstore. And they were like, okay, so you can implement some world building here. This needs a little more description. So they kind of helped build a little bit of the bones. But overall, the concept from start to finish stayed the same.
Incredible. Speaking of world building, uh, fantasy worlds are always massive, right? They have to be. You have to be. You have several countries in Etch, not all explored, but several countries, uh, and it's often hard for readers to kind of grasp in terms of size and scale. Um, was there a point in your writing, and you just mentioned this with your beta readers, so to speak, where you thought maybe the scale is too big or too small? Was there really a lot of workshopping around it so you could come up with that perfect medium? Or was it you're like, this is the world and you're going to have to deal with it because I'm not changing it?
My world actually started really small, and then I was like, this doesn't feel fantasy enough. I need to expand on it. So that's the reason that a lot of the other countries weren't named. I was like, this isn't large enough. And especially going into book two, I was like, I need to expand upon this because they're going to travel to at least one other country. but I need to touch on the other ones because they need to know that there's actually a world in this universe.
That's yeah, that's a good answer. Tolkien famously drew the entire map of Middle Earth before writing a single sentence of well, he wrote one single sentence on someone's test, but before actually writing the book, he drew the entirety of Middle Earth before The Hobbit. What came first? Was it the map or was it the story? So you wrote the story and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to plot out all the points, or did you come up with the map and then sort of into the story?
So it was a little mix of both, actually. I got about a third of the way into writing the novel, and then I was like, okay, I don't actually know where my characters were directionally before, so I need a map to actually guide myself through this story. So it was about
Nice.
halfway through the story that I had like a full page map that I was like referencing for everything. And I went back and did some corrections in the first half of the story to make sure that their direction was correct and like the distance that they'd traveled and like the description of what I was describing in the world matched what was in the map for travel.
When you have to go back and do something like that, when you're editing to create that distance, is it something that was not tedious to, per se, but like something that was a little bit more challenging because it's hard to imagine vast scopes of like just walking, or was it something that you sort of did naturally and just worked out in like in process of creating the map? You're like, okay, this is 2 kilometers, 2 kilometers, 2 kilometers, 2 kilometers, or rather, was it something that you really had to work on and keep going back to change?
So when I was correcting that first half, that was really difficult for me. I did have to like really work at that. But once
Mhm.
I had the established map, writing the second half of the book and writing book two was super easy because I could just finger trail it along. I'm like, okay, so that's roughly this far because I referenced that earlier in book one, and I remember doing that. So now I know that I can do this. When I didn't have a
Nice.
map, I was just lost.
Yeah, it's like playing D&D and expecting everyone to know exactly where you are. You know, it's interesting because when we talk about fantasy worlds and the sheer scope of fantasy worlds, it's sometimes hard to remember that someone has to actually sit there and be a cartographer, so to speak, and come up with that world. It's all fine and dandy to say, Brandon Sanderson's Roshar is this big, but you're like, who came up with that? Who was really sitting down and drawing those lines out?
Hmm.
So I think it's a credit to your writing ability that you're able to create such a world where the scope seems to be realistic and an actual amount of travel that the characters go through.
Hmm.
Um, let's talk for a second about the magic system, though, because this I think is one of the most interesting parts of this particular series is the magic system uh, for the elven characters, and it's quite unique. Um, Now, it's my understanding that no two races of elves use the same type of magic,
Yeah.
um, and you rely on certain aspects of it to what's the word I'm looking for, to amplify that. So when you're developing a system like this, when you're developing a magic system that hasn't been done before,
Mhm.
or at least hasn't been widely popularized, is there a fair amount of workshopping and beta testing that goes into it to see what works, what doesn't? Do you get a lot of feedback?
Mhm. I did get a lot of feedback early on with my world building. Later on in the series, I didn't get as much, but as I grew as a writer through doing short stories and other projects, I started looking back at Stone Souls and I'm like, okay, so those were some areas that I could have improved that world building, where I could have like elaborated on how that system specifically worked or why they didn't cross over.
Hmm.
But essentially, when I did create it originally, it was just the concept that it was a fairly new world, that the magic system was fairly new to them, only like a few thousand years old, and that they were all still kind of learning about it.
That's a good, yeah, that's makes sense. And from what I can tell from the novel, and at least in book one, the I don't want to say I'm going to say nationalism because I can't think of a better term, but there is very little interpersonal relationships between different types of elves that is not aggressive or hostile.
Yeah.
Um, when creating the world like that, was there a specific reason you chose to kind of have the main I'm not even gonna say the main antagonist because I feel like there's a lot of antagonists who are the head of state in this.
Mhm.
Did you have, a reason for giving certain elves more power than others, such as I'm realizing now I've never said her name out loud. Is it Volley or Valley?
Valley.
Valley. It is
Yeah.
specifically Valley's people, and her grandmother have a certain amount of power, whereas Ilva's father and mother, who
Mhm.
have a very interesting and unfortunate relationship, um, they have a different level of power that seems to be on the lower end. Was there like a specific reason that the stone elves compared to the Sylvite elves and the um I'm blanking on Valley's heritage, why those
The silver
specific
and
groups
Holstein.
had those? Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
they
silver
all
elves.
had different levels that were explained a little bit better in book two. There is a control power dynamic that gets explained again in book two, but it's, I don't want to spoil anything because I know you haven't read it yet. Uh,
Fair, fair.
but essentially, there is a power dynamic with one silver elf that is in control over a lot of different elements for a very specific reason, and she's kind of controlling the narrative around all of the other classes of elves.
Mm.
So for example, without spoiling, a few of the elves, unnamed, I'm not going to name them, don't have control of their own power, and they don't even know that they are not in control of their own body and their own powers right now.
Oh.
So there's some interesting things to come, but they do kind of touch on that in book two, and I plan on touching on it in a couple of novellas as well for the series.
Oh, I love a good not in control power dynamic. I'm a huge fan of those tropes. And you know, while we are on the subject of characters, I'd like to talk about Valley for a second because Valley is arguably not arguably Valley is my favorite character, I think. And Valley is blind. Now, she uses her other senses quite well. She navigates the world. She's able to kill a dragon almost immediately. And while Valley's disability does not define her, because she is arguably the most combat effective character throughout the book until a very certain point where, and I didn't know this was possible, you chose to give her back the sight for 2 minutes and then somehow make her more blind than before, which I didn't realize was a thing. So
Yeah.
my question to you is, what did Valley ever do to you to make you do that?
So Vali was a little bit of a personal one. Um, when I wrote her dynamic, I kind of switched between Ilva and her for some kind of self-insert moments. I struggle with my own disabilities, and I've had some vision issues. I've had LASIK eye surgery, and I was the one in 500 that ended up getting the sands of Sahara in my eyes. But I also
Mm,
had family members when I was growing up who were blind. So having some knowledge around the disabilities and the levels of them, my aunt, she was blind, and whenever I'd go grocery shopping with her, she was very independent. She had to pick her own foods. She wouldn't let me touch the fruit. And I was just like, how do you know if they're good? And she's like, I can smell them, I can feel them. So knowing that, she used her other senses, that was kind of some inspiration for me to write. But also knowing some of my fears around losing sight, I wanted to kind of process some of those in my writing. As somebody who has struggled with wavering eye issues, like whether I'm going more or less sight, like it was really scary for a
mhm,
while there when I was seeing nothing but shapes.
yes, that would be terrifying. In fact, so it's good to know that there is a reason, not a reason, but a explanation behind Valley's disability, as well as there's a clear knowledge of the disability. So when writing, the what we're getting is the actual perspective of someone who is,
Yeah.
you know,
So the Juan is an
having vision
interesting
issues.
character as well too. He's the one who kind of gives her the sight and then takes it away again. So
Hmm.
kind of relating to how we do also have powers in this world to heal certain abilities, but then that can also worsen them long term. So there's not really any way to know whether it's going to be effective or not. And I think that in that moment, the Juan was just experimenting with her and seeing if his power would work for that when I was writing
Oh,
him, is what I
interesting.
imagined.
Okay, oh I didn't even consider that point when reading the character. He's that's an interesting outlook on that. Let's touch on that for a second, though. The concept of the self insert moments. Would you say that writing for you has been a form of like a therapeutic expression of emotions and fears? Would you say that's something that you would advocate for as writing as a expression of emotion and
Definitely.
fear?
Definitely. I may not pour as much of myself into my characters as maybe other authors do, and maybe not, or maybe less than authors do as well. But I do pour like little pieces into each and every single character. So everything from the Wraith one and even my villains, they have a little bit of the negative internal dialogue that I kind of grew up with that I had to overcome. So some of that is also drawn from inspiration that's personal. And even my short stories that I write and stuff like that. Each of them has like some small element of myself in them. And it is very therapeutic and kind of helpful to kind of move through it in a creative way.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. Um, when was still on the concept of characters here, Ilva and Vali, they are an interesting pairing. They are the core concept of they're not the core concept, sorry. The core part of the book is the dynamic between the two of them. Um, and their growing relationship as well as their own individual personalities. Was there a point when you were writing that these two characters look different than how they look now, or were they always sort of were they less in terms of like on the chopping block in terms of personality and aspects? Were they something you had to workshop a lot, or not really?
Not really. That's actually the entire story. The entire idea came just from a character inspiration straight off the bat. So Ilva and Vali came to my mind first, and all the other kind of characters came after. The world came after the characters, the magic system, everything. It started with just Ilva and Vali, and they stayed the most consistent concept throughout the story.
Okay, that's good. I love a character centric story, right? Love love building around the characters. Um, what was my next question? Right. So you mentioned now there's two books out for Stone and Souls, and you did just kind of mention novellas. Do you
Yes.
have a planned length for the series, and or are you just kind of organically seeing where it goes?
I was originally going to publish it as 4 books. I started off wanting to do a duology, but then I left a little bit of an open ending with book 2, just a minor open ending.
Hmm.
And I thought about ending it there, but then I was like, well, I could also expand on it too. So I considered writing 2 more books, and I may do that in the future. But there will definitely be 2 novellas, a kind of prequel and then a kind of like follow up to the original story.
Amazing. Um, Now, before we started, you and I were talking briefly about um, author communities, and that's something we haven't talked much about here on this platform yet. But it is something that might be helpful because, as I was mentioning, your name popped up in the back of a different person who's showing up on Authors Vox in a little bit. Um, how? What's the question I'm trying to say here? Is when we think about community as a whole, and you mentioned on a Discord chat, how open was the author community when you started self-publishing?
When I started self publishing, I actually began through an independent author that I met when I worked at a bookstore. So I used to work at a Coles Books here in Canada, Ontario. And there was an independent author, Mallory McCartney. She came in to drop off some of her books, and that was the first independent author that I met. And then we got chatting, and I asked her how she did that. So she gave me a little bit of coaching through it, a little bit of support, and then I met some other resources through her, a cover artist, an editor, and then through that in the Bookstagram space, I managed to meet some more authors, and then we all kind of like created a little group chat, and then it just added more and more over time. The author that you mentioned at the beginning there, FS Autumn. So she's actually the one who did the illustrating in my new second print editions as well. So we all kind of trade our different skills and we support each other financially, which is really nice. Like, that's really nice to be able to support editors, artists, authors, and creatives all across the spectrum and have a group of them
Hmm.
with all different skills.
I did not know she did the illustrations. That's interesting. I'm gonna
Yeah.
bring that up when I meet with her. Um, so if we're talking about someone who wants to get into this sphere and is looking for resources, um, you mentioned the independent author came in to see you. Would you say it's easier now to find resources? Having this group of people that you collaborate with, would you say it's easier to find
Oh,
resources and
absolutely.
people who work with?
Absolutely. We have actually a resources room in there, a specific channel in the server just for resources where we drop and tag them all. And I also run a blog that, or I used to run a blog. I still have one, but my old resources posts all got compiled into a quick FAQ. So if you want to figure out where to get an ISBN, how to do your taxes, any of that kind of information, it's all on my blog in one neat post.
That's, I imagine, incredible amounts of help for people who are really looking to get into self-publishing. And when, if someone were listening to this and they wanted to self-publish, or they wanted to be a published author, whether that be traditional or independent. Is there a specific piece of advice you would give them, or is there are there clear pros and cons to indie publishing as opposed to traditional publishing that you would highlight, or is it just sort of whatever, just start where you start and keep going?
When it comes to indie versus traditional, if you're going indie, be prepared to spend a lot and take a lot more time because it is definitely a lot of work. You wear many hats. Traditional, be prepared for rejections often because they will be continuous until you find that one perfect publisher.
Okay, fair. Yeah, that is echoing a sentiment I remember from a creative writing professor I had in university, where she said, "You just have to be okay with hearing no." I was
Yeah.
like, "Ooh, I am not, so I might not do this." I'm
I'm a little
very
bit of
easily discouraged.
yeah, I'm not very good with the no's and the rejections, and I also like to have a lot of creative freedom, so that's why I chose indie. I was like, I just really want to be able to decide my cover art, to
Hmm.
decide how it looks inside, to not have anybody change my story. So I went independent just so that I could have that creative freedom.
Creative freedom is something that keeps getting brought up, and I'm glad it is. When you write, what is the word I'm looking for? When you write and you give your work to, say, beta readers or friends, anyone really who's checking, and they give you notes, how often would you say that you apply all of those notes, or is it something you choose and you're like, you might not like this, but I do?
I actually take a lot of the advice that I get because my writer friends are very good at helping advise me on my stories. It's usually not very large things that they suggest. It's normally just a sentence structure thing or something specific with. I'm really bad with tenses. That's my major error. My major flaw as an author is that I mix up past and present sometimes. So like did and doing, I will like mix that up sometimes in the context, and they're like, "Oh, you're doing it again," and I'm like, "Thank
Mhm.
you, thank you."
That's good. That is good. Yeah, it's good to know, have people who can point those out where you're like, hang on now, because this doesn't
Mhm,
track. So you mentioned briefly that you worked at a Coles in Ontario. Um, we're both from Ontario.
mhm,
We are aware, I would hope you are aware, the ever growing struggle of literacy rates,
mhm,
specifically in Ontario and America. And recently there was a published thing where the current Ontario government has decided, in response to the lower literacy rates, instead of providing services to, increase the literacy rates, they would rather go the opposite direction and just lower the goals to make it
mhm.
easier to obtain.
Yeah.
My question for you is, if you were to stand in front of, say, a high school class or a elementary school class, a class in general,
Mhm.
and you were asked to give one good reason why students should read and write, what would you say?
I would say that there's a lot of science to prove that that is a very like psychologically enriching activity, that it's something that can really help benefit somebody in their emotional resilience, in their capacity of understanding, and in their ability to be creative. It's definitely a skill that everyone should have because reading is something that we have to do with everyday life, whether it's emails and instruction manuals to, just a package to make sure that you're not getting something that you're allergic to. Reading is a necessary skill.
It's interesting. I've asked that question to everybody who's been on here. Not one person has said the allergy thing. So that's a great point that I also keep forgetting. Um, Giles, that's all I have for you in terms of major questions. And as someone who read book one, I'm very excited to read book two. as soon as I have time when I'm not reading all the other books for all these interviews. But before you go,
Mhm.
I have 10 rapid fire questions for you. And I'm just going to ask them and just give me one or the other, and then we'll just move right on. Okay.
All right, let's go.
All right. So, first and foremost, pen and paper or computers for writing?
Computer.
Card game or board game?
Oh, card game.
Cozy game or action game?
Action.
RPG or life sim?
RPG.
Choose your own adventure novels or TTRPG games?
Choose your own adventure.
Tea or coffee?
T.
Hike or beach?
Hike.
Enemies to lovers or soulmates?
Soulmates.
Operas or musicals?
Musicals.
And finally, rock music or pop music?
Rock.
Okay, amazing. That was 10 rapid fire questions, J.A.L.S. Thank you so much for being on here. This was so great. And if you're listening, listeners or watchers, whatever, go check out the Stone Soul series. It's on Amazon, and I'm sure it's on other places that benefit authors in terms of purchases, much
It's
more.
available worldwide distribution.
Worldwide
Anywhere the books are
distribution.
sold.
Anywhere books are sold, even better. Thank you so much for coming on here. Is there anything you'd like to promote? Anything coming up that you'd like people to know about?
I do have an anthology. It's coming out in September. It donates 100% of the proceeds to charity. It's a women's interval home. It's a shelter in my area that I used to live in 20 years ago. So I'm giving back.
That's an incredible thing to do, especially in the current climate we're in. And thank you so much for being here, and I would love to have you back when the anthology series comes out to talk about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick.
Okay, all right, thank you, and stay magical, my friends.